Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drehon, and hold up, V. This is take 2 now. Do we have the audio working?
Yes, I turned that on just before you pressed record.
Awesome. Sorry, I recorded this a while ago and just realized that we didn't have the audio on the first take. Anyway, welcome back to our guide to Homebrewery. This is our 100 subscriber special series. And today we are taking a look at how to make your own spells. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the magic. To create a spell, simply go to the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 283. This is video number 3 of our series, so if you haven't seen the first 2, please make sure to check them out if you wish. Now, before we get to actually create the spells, we need to consider the following. According to the Dungeon Master's Guide, we have this disclaimer. If a spell is so good that a caster would want to use it all the time, it might be too powerful for its level. Which actually makes sense. You want to make sure that there are more options for your spellcasters to use. If a spellcaster just uses one spell all the time, like say Eldritch Blast, apparently, then it probably should not be that powerful, or at least it should be harder to obtain. So, have a good damage dealer or a good controller spell be appropriately leveled. Get some good prerequisites, something like that. Also, a long duration or large area can make up for a lesser effect, depending on the spell. A good example would be the Thunderwave spell. While it has a low damage output, it also has the effect of moving creatures away from the user, which honestly is pretty useful, especially for that lesser effect. Now, also things to consider is to avoid spells that have very limited use, such as one that works only against good dragons. For some reason, I forgot to put that D in good. Though such a spell could exist in the world, few characters will bother to learn or prepare it unless they know in advance that doing so will be worthwhile. It's almost like with everyone's problem with the Ranger class. It's too situational, nobody wants to use it. Make sure it's not as situational. Have a broader terminology and not something that's so restrictive. Kind of like the spell Detect Evil and Good. That spell has a restricted use, but it is still useful. Unless, of course, your dungeon master is running a campaign that doesn't have any of those doesn't have any of those prerequisites that are within the spell. In which case, you need to make sure you are talking with your dungeon master. Finally, make sure the spell fits the identity of the class. Wizards and sorcerers don't typically have access to healing spells, for example, and adding a healing spell to the wizard class list would step on the cleric's turf. Which makes sense. I would recommend having a healing spell just for clerics, druids, maybe rangers, and most definitely paladins. But having a wizard cast a healing spell, at least one with a very good restriction, like it being a ritual that needs to be cast over the course of, 12 hours, 24 hours, over the course of a long rest might actually be a good restriction for a wizard healing spell, especially one that is of high level. Having something that would be high enough level for something out of the ordinary would make sense. But also keep in mind that you want to keep the spells close enough to the class that would use it. Like, for example, one thing that I have a problem with the Artificer is that there are some spells that it does not have the ability to use, even though it should be able to use them, because it's very thematic. But there are cases where some spells don't quite fit the theme of the class, or subclass rather. It just seems a bit off to have certain spells that don't make sense for that class. Now, moving on to damage, this is the only other step that we have to go off of. Damage and healing. We have a list of, I guess, average amount of damage that a spell would have at these levels. So a cantrip, for example, if it were to target one creature, would have a 1d10 damage die for an average of 5.5 damage, while a cantrip that hits multiple targets would have a normal damage of 1d6 or 3.5, which is good and practical. But there is more. If you're wanting more damage dice, then go for a lesser damage die. So have a cantrip use 2d4 for an average of 5 instead of using a 1d10. And actually, that makes a lot of sense, especially for how they describe it. Using more of a smaller damage die will allow you to hit the average damage a lot more, 5 in this case, than one singular large die. So yeah, that makes kind of sense. Having a target take 2 dice of damage instead of 1 works, especially with our example here. With the 1d10, you have a minimum of 1 damage going at the creature, while 2d4 has a minimum of 2 damage. Now, there is another thing to consider as well, and that is if the spell has a target make a saving throw to avoid all of the damage that the spell would cause, you should increase the damage of that spell by 25%. The example I'm going to use here is the following. The target must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or take 2d10 poison damage. So if the creature were to succeed this save, no damage, no problem. So, with this in mind, the average damage that this spell would produce is 11. Increase that by 25% and you've got 13.75 damage. With that taken in consideration, we can change the spell's damage from 2d10 to a 3d8. This is because 1d8 has an average damage output of 4.5, while 3 of them would be 13.5. Slightly under the damage average that we calculated a second ago. Now, there is also other things to consider when making your spell, not just your name and your level. We have the casting time, the range, duration, attack bonus, damage output, which we just talked about, the save type and its DC, as well as the components, material, somatic, and verbal. We also have the different schools of magic consider, because there are abilities and other spells that take the school into consideration. Abjuration, conjuration, divination, enchantment, evocation, illusion, necromancy, and transmutation. So having those in consideration with making your spell is really important. Now you're probably wondering, Drayhan, why haven't you made a spell for this tutorial video? You did so last time with the monster. Why not a spell? Well, that is because I couldn't think of anything. I have worked on this video all week, and I haven't thought of anything. Nothing has come to mind. I mean, I've thought of some spells, but they're more of reskins of other spells, and I've already talked about that in the first video. Just take a spell that already exists and reflavor it to suit your needs. So it doesn't quite make sense to make a spell for this video. But that's not to say that I'm done here, because I have a challenge for you, my dear viewers. I want you to make a spell and put it in the comment section down below, or go to my Twitter page and at me at @Drayhan_YT and tell me your spell. Let's see, how many subscribers do I have? 115? Let's say... do this, and we'll say 15 of those spells that I like will get a shout out in one of my homebrew videos. That sound fair? Make me a spell using the guidelines that I have shown you today, and whatever other guidelines that you might find in the raw that I might have missed. With that being said, I hope you have enjoyed. I will see you all next time when I talk about how to make a magic item. But I am out of time. And until next time, this has been Drayhan, and I am offline.